I think there's a lot of people that are making a lot of pretty bold claims about what GenAI can or can't do without necessarily having all the evidence yet. I do think it is going to be pretty transformative to observe to data in general is actually how I see it. So one thing that Honeycomb has is we have a feature called Query Assistant, and that is powered by generative AI. And basically what it lets you do is it lets you ask questions in natural language. And then we use that natural language query, turn it into a Honeycomb query. So instead of having to know the query dialect, you can just say like, show me all my errors grouped by region, and boop, it does it.
Hi, this is your host Saptal Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon and CloudNativeCon in Paris. And today we have with us once again Austin Parker, Director of Open Source at Honeycomb. Austin, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here once again.
Once again,
Another KubeCon.
Yeah, you are becoming a KubeCon regular on the show, right?
I think so, yeah.
We should do better than that. Not every 6 months. We should do
We
it.
probably should.
Yeah, at least once a month, right? Because there's so much happening in this space.
Right, you have to get an update in OpenTelemetry every month because we got so much going on.
Exactly. So let's start with some of the basics. And the basic is that you have booth here, you have presence here. It's Paris. Last time we were in Chicago. When people are walking to your booth, you are having a lot of, what kind of discussions you're having? What kind of audience are you seeing here?
So I think this is my fourth or fifth KubeCon in a row. Or I guess actually I've been since 2019 is when we started doing OpenTelemetry, and that was kind of the first big in-person meeting of that project. And from looking at it year over year, KubeCon over KubeCon, what you see is just this remarkable change in how many people are actually showing up that are using OpenTelemetry. So a really great example is, year and a half ago, over in Detroit, the Detroit KubeCon a couple years ago, we had a project meeting. It was about 60 people in the room, standing room only, but it was a small meeting room. Yesterday, for our maintainers track session, we were standing room only, 690 something people, and they were turning people away at the door. So just in a year and a half, we've seen this ridiculous levels of growth in the project. One fun stat is that we have just for this month, we have 2,500 unique contributors to OpenTelemetry. The project has been on this ridiculous growth curve. And not just in terms of like contributors, it's also in terms of users, right? Like when we asked the crowd yesterday, like, hey, how many of you are using OpenTelemetry in production? I would say like 95% of the hands went up. It's really hard to understate like how explosive the growth of OpenTelemetry has been. From a few years ago when it was just like, it's like OpenTelemetry, what's that? Or, I use Prometheus, or I use logging, or I don't, what is any of this stuff? To now, it's just a complete 180. More people are coming up that don't, that are using OpenTelemetry that don't. More people are coming up talking about, actual real world challenges of like using this in production and monitoring, fleets of thousands and thousands of nodes and pods. And as an observability company, Honeycomb is in this really interesting spot where we're also getting that lift, right? Instead of having to go out, and I think this is what a lot of our peers are also seeing. Nobody's coming up and saying like, "Oh, I don't have anything. I want to start using you. What do I do?" People are coming up and saying like, "Oh, I'm using OpenTelemetry. How do you work with OpenTelemetry, right? What do you get me that I don't get by self-hosting or da 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 da?"
I will also talk about, what drove this awareness and adoption, but I also quickly want to talk about Honeycomb, what role it's playing. We talked about last time, why you joined the company, but I just want to talk about in this last 6 months.
Yeah.
Talk about any updates at the company itself, and also tell viewers, as you said, a lot of people come and walk, I use OpenTelemetry, what Honeycomb can do for me.
One thing that we're working on right now that's really exciting, it's going into kind of a public beta here really soon, is we're trying to extend the view that OpenTelemetry can give you. Right now it's really good at back end stuff. People that are using it on the front end or on the client side tend to not quite as a nice and neat onboarding approach. So what we've done is we're heavily invested in all of the different front end SIGs and other groups working to advance this in OpenTelemetry itself. But we're releasing a beta of our OpenTelemetry web distro. Web wrapper. And what that does, that gives you things like core web vitals. That gives you sort of the information you need as a front end developer to understand, hey, what's going on in my browser application. But then, since it's built on top of OpenTelemetry, that data instantly correlates with the stuff in the back end. So not only can you say like, okay, here's what's slow, or here's where I'm having problems in the front end, you can really easily figure out what is causing that, what's contributing to those failures or to that poor user experience on the back end, and then use that data to do things like set up SLOs on user experience, and use other great Honeycomb features, right? Like look at your service map and see like, okay, where is all the calls from the front end going, and where is the latency at? Where do I need to keep looking to investigate why my system is slow or why is it having problems?
What drove this awareness and adoption of OpenTelemetry?
It's a really good question. I wish I had a better answer, because it's not like we went out and marketed it, right? Like, I mean, I do think that there were a lot of people in the industry. We have a lot of great partners in OpenTelemetry, right? Great contributors from companies like Splunk and Honeycomb and Dynatrace and AppDynamics and Grafana and everyone else. It'd be easier to list the people that don't contribute than the people that contribute. And everyone certainly did a lot of work on promoting that project and helping their customers, helping their users understand. What I think has been most interesting about this is that it's actually gone beyond that now. Like, there was a lot of work early on where we were trying to go out and evangelize and educate the community about, hey, here's this thing called OpenTelemetry. And now what we're seeing is customers are coming to, even existing customers of places are coming in saying like, hey, independently of anything you want, we're migrating to OpenTelemetry and we want support from you on this. So there was a news story this week where Dynatrace is releasing a OpenTelemetry distribution, which is an officially supported one. And a lot of this it's pretty similar to how like the Red Hat model works, right? Like companies, enterprises want support. They want someone they can call when things break. And that's what you're seeing now, I think, a lot with OpenTelemetry is because customers are adopting this, because users are adopting this, they're actually starting to drive these changes in existing observability tools and monitoring tools.
How crowded, how big is the OpenTelemetry market? Because sometimes we have to worry about the vendor sprawl. It's good to have a healthy ecosystem there, but choices can also be...
Yeah. I mean, it's like the total addressable market of observability is everyone, right? Like, I think one thing that's really interesting with OpenTelemetry is that if you think broadly about what is telemetry, I mean, sure, there's application metrics, logs, traces, infrastructure metrics, and logs. But think about, from the perspective of a business, well, there's a lot of business data that ultimately is telemetry. There's user analytics. There's order confirmations and shipping and revenue data and contact lists and all this data that you need to run a business. A lot of that is telemetry. And when I think about what is OpenTelemetry doing today and where is it going in the future, I see it being really about expanding into that greater and greater definition of what telemetry is. And that's one of the things that we're working on as a project right now. We just announced this week that we're bringing in profiling as a new signal. So continuous profiles, we're able to get sort of function and line of code level insights into your application behavior. We're also working really hard to add in this idea of events. So things like cloud events or software development lifecycle events, or user sessions, or even user analytics, right? There's so many things that are just an event in the world of software performance. We're going to be bringing those in as well, and we'll have a spec for that. And all of this, a really interesting way I've been thinking about this is, if you think about how the web has changed over the years, one of the biggest changes was this idea of schemas for content. So it used to be you would just have a website, you would put some stuff on it, but then everyone, because it became easier to Google was able to come out and kind of throw support behind this idea of schemas. So you have a blog schema or a e-commerce schema or a product schema. And then when your website gets indexed by a search engine, they could use that schema to kind of display results in a more contextual way. And I think you're seeing a very similar thing where OpenTelemetry is driving the creation of a lot of these data schemas, and that's going to have a really huge impact on like not just how people generate and create and collect data, but also in how companies, think about that data, how observability tooling processes that data, the sort of questions you can ask about that data. And it's going to have pretty far-reaching impacts on not just, the Honeycombs of the world, but also, I think, your big data places and your business analytics places and so on and so forth.
What should be the right approach when they look at observability, where sometimes a lot of things overlap,
Yeah.
which overlaps means cost, wasted resources. So, I mean, of course, you might have some bias because you're in the space, but what would be the right approach when they are looking at observability and solving those problems?
I think there's a Charity Majors is starting to write about this a little bit, and a few other people. I've seen a few other blogs recently about this, and I think what we're seeing is that the industry as a whole is coming around to this idea that it's time to version observability, and it's time to kind of say like there's observability 1.0, and then there's something over here that's observability 2.0, and there's a maturity model that fits into that. Because a lot of people are on observability 1.0, right? They're able to manage the complexity of Kubernetes through traditional sorts of monitoring and alerting tools. They're able to figure out when incidents are happening and how to solve those incidents. But when you think about what is the difference between these, like where am I trying to get to, you're trying to answer bigger questions, and cost is a huge one of those. The problem with observability 1.0 is that your cost is generally exponential based on your traffic or whatever. The more complex your system gets, the more you end up paying for data, and the only way you can control that cost is really by losing resolution, right? So you do pretty blind, you're blindly reducing metric cardinality, or you're dropping a lot of logs through heavy sampling, or you're doing kind of head sampling of traces. And the more you apply these cost controls, it affects your ability to actually understand your system and understand what's going on. And I think the biggest thing that changes as you move up this maturity model and you go from observability 1.0 to 2.0 is that in 2.0, your costs are managed and controlled, and they grow linearly with your traffic, right? Because every point of data that is coming out of a sort of an observability 2.0 workflow is going to be valuable data in some way. Because one is that you've been intentional about saying, well, why am I doing this? So in the observability 1.0 world, you're collecting data for the sake of collecting data, right? You're getting these signals because that's what you're supposed to do. And if you have enough data, then you have some internal confidence that, when something does break, I can dig through it and find out what's going on. In an observability 2.0 world, you're doing a lot more thinking ahead of time and saying like, okay, what data do I need to understand the performance of my system as it relates to these sort of business outcomes, right? I want to ensure that customers are happy. I want to ensure that my shopping cart, that when I add something to the shopping cart, it's successful in under 50 milliseconds, 99% of the time. Whatever goals I'm setting, that these goals are business goals at the end of the day. They map to revenue. They map to everyone getting their paycheck and continuing to have a great, happy life. But that's why you're doing observability, right? Like we can put a lot of stuff in front of it, and we can put a lot of abstractions and say like, oh no, observability is this or the other. But really, it's about I'm trying to run a system, and that system to support a business. Like that's how I should think about observability. I should say, okay, what's the stuff that I need to actually care about in order to accomplish those business goals? What data do I need to collect and store? How long do I need to collect and store? And then once you have those goals defined, it's a lot easier to go back and say, okay, how can we make sort of automated systems that are able to look at the data I have map it to those goals, and then automatically give me the data I need without me having to, do this sort of very rough sampling or upfront decisions, and have that be dynamic. And that's where I see a lot of places going right now. And there are people that are doing this. A lot of them tend to be in like really, really big companies. You look at like what Meta is doing. They have like an incredibly mature observability program. They're doing Observability 2.0. You look at, maybe a Microsoft, parts of them certainly doing this. They're using AI, they're using all of this stuff. But it's really hard to get to if you're not that kind of scale. And I think this is the big challenge that I see a lot of engineering leaders, CIOs and CTOs, people like that, grapple with, is building that kind of observability is really, really, really expensive. And it's very expensive to maintain. So if you have, 10 headcount this year, are you going to spend it all on people not, are you going to spend all of that on 10 engineers to work on your observability stack? Or are you going to spend it on 10 engineers to build features and help you innovate? I know which one I would pick.
Since you dropped the word AI and Gen AI is a big in the keynotes also we talked about. Let's look what role do you see Gen AI can or is playing in the observability space or for Honeycomb or OpenTelemetry?
I think there's a lot of people that are making a lot of pretty bold claims about what GenAI can or can't do without necessarily having all the evidence yet. I do think it is going to be pretty transformative to to data in general, is actually how I see it. So one thing that Honeycomb has is we have a feature called Query Assistant, and that is powered by generative AI. And basically what it lets you do is it lets you ask questions in natural language. And then we use that natural language query, turn it into a Honeycomb query. So instead of having to know the query dialect, you can just say like, show me all my errors grouped by region, and boop, it does it. I'm actually pretty bullish on. I feel like in the very near future, most kind of data exploration tasks like that will be done using LLMs and Gen AI just to generate the queries, because it's a lot easier than having to remember like SQL. Like I still have to look up how to do a lot of things in SQL. And don't even get me started on PromQL. It's a very powerful and expressive language, but like you have to master it. And I am always newly surprised when it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. There's so much you can do with these query languages we have, and people simply don't know them. But that's where these large language models and generative AI comes in. It makes it possible for people that aren't experts to ask questions in a natural language and have the machine spit something back. And that's going to be hugely impactful. Now, where I think the plot gets a little dropped is when you talk about like automated remediation and you start talking about the AI fixing things. And that's a bit more... I think there will certainly be things that get better with that. Like OpenTelemetry specifically is a great input to these kind of language models because the data is so highly structured and there's so many really great schemas that say this is what this thing means. And that's great context to give to Gen AI so that it can do something useful. However, while systems tend to be similar, they're all slightly different enough that it's really challenging to make something truly general purpose there, I believe. I read a really interesting paper from Microsoft talking about a Copilot, what do they call it? Like Copilot root cause analysis. And it's basically an LLM that looks at when there's an incident or when there's an alert gets fired, it looks at all of these run books they basically have, and it finds the one that matches and does some LLM magic and pulls together a bunch of different data and pops out hey, this alert fired, it's probably because of this, I think so because of that. That works really well if you're Microsoft, right? And you have a huge system in production with years and years and years of operational experience and processes that you can sort of map into the LLM. Excuse me. That kind of data quality and availability and all that, that's not a universal, right? And I think if you take the same sort of thing and you start splashing it out like random Kubernetes clusters, I don't know how well it'll work. I can certainly see Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whoever like making stuff like this available through their platforms, because they probably have a generalized idea of like they can find the similarities. A lot of people running managed Kubernetes, but I don't know, right? Like, I think that's the great cool thing about it, is that I actually don't know. There is obviously applications there, but I think you have to be in this observability 2.0 mindset to really make use of them, because you have to have the high amount of context, high amount of structured data, high amount of semantically accurate data. And without that, all of this stuff just kind of falls apart.
No, excellent. No, very well said. Thank you so much. I think now we have everything. We can wrap this up, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the Austin. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out today. Great insights there. Thank you so much. And as usual, I look forward to talk to you again soon. But let's not wait all the way till Salt Lake City. Let's talk before that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's always a pleasure to be on, and great seeing you. And until next time.